joining us. This is Linda Fitzgerald with the SBDC. Thank you for joining for the How to Start a Podcast webinar. This is the Shasta-Cascade SBDC, and we provide no-cost, confidential, one-on-one advisory services to entrepreneurs and small businesses in both Shasta and Trinity counties. We also offer no-cost or low-cost workshops and webinars just like this one. We're funded by the U.S. Small Business Administration, the state of California, and Humboldt State University. So as you're watching this webinar, I want you to know that Megan is an advisor with the SBDC. And if you're watching this and saying, oh my goodness, there's so much more I want to learn, know that this is just your starting point, and you can have time scheduled with Megan, and those scheduled appointments are free to you, though they're not technically free to you because you've already paid for them with your tax dollars. So it's a wonderful opportunity for people, small businesses, to get the support they need through the through the SBDC, excuse me. And Megan is one of the many advisors. We have quite a few, and they all focus on different areas. So just know that there is support out there for you and your small business. And right now, let me introduce to you Megan Spaulding, who's going to run today's webinar.
Hey everyone, so as Linda mentioned, I'm Megan. I am the CEO of Brand Science, and we're a full service marketing agency, and we specialize really in the digital space, which is kind of how I got into podcasting and in the podcasting world, was actually from the marketing standpoint. And I ended up actually starting my own podcast. I am on break or on pause from the podcasting with so many other things going on in life and business, but I was able to grow a pretty good sized listenership in a short period of time, and I had a lot of fun with it. And what my biggest takeaway was from that season, which was really a hobby season for me, was that podcasting is so much easier than I think people expect it to be. It seems like it's a big daunting thing when really, I like to say, you can put as much or as little into it and you can still have a really high quality podcast without sinking in a ton of time. I am an exceptionally busy person, it seems like, and I still had the time. My podcast actually wasn't related to my business, though as a marketer, I have seen people take podcasts and just use it to skyrocket their leads. But I was able to actually have a full podcast as a hobby on the side while running 2 businesses and doing all of the various things I do in our community and serving the city of Reading. So all that to say, if you're wondering if that's one of the things of, do I have enough time to start a podcast? That's the first thing we're going to address is yes, this is really something that you can really streamline, and I'm really excited to just chat with you guys about what it can look like for your businesses, for your platforms, whatever it is that your goals are with podcasting. So today we're going to start out briefly with why you would want to start a podcast in the first place, because there's a number of different reasons. We'll get into planning your podcast, the equipment you'll need, tips for recording, which is my favorite part because it saves so much time, editing your episodes, marketing your podcast, and then ultimately monetizing. So by the end of this course or this webinar, you'll be able to effectively plan and launch your first podcast. All right, but before we begin, I want to make sure that as we're talking about podcasts, that we can really be as specific as possible and I love giving examples based on your guys' ideas. So a few of you before we started put in the chat what your different podcasting ideas are. And I would love for anyone else who's open or wants to, feel free to unmute yourself and introduce yourself and tell us about your business or your podcast idea or why you're here tonight.
Well, my name is Marcia Strong, Marcia Strong-Smith, and I've written and illustrated for children's books, and from those books created anti-bullying tools for elementary schools. So I have a couple of things. I'm not sure whether I want to do educational videos instead of making author visits into the classroom, which is a long, I enjoy being in a classroom, but maybe a podcast, especially with this covert shelter in place thing in education. This might be the way to reach more of a audience in the elementary schools, because that world is changing. Or I may just have a podcast. I used to teach watercolor, and maybe I'll go that direction. I'm not sure. So that's where I am.
Well, thanks for attending tonight. If anyone else wants to introduce themselves, I see a few people in the chat. We have, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. We have Sabra, who's a podcast to students that she works with as an independent education consultant. So another person in the education realm. We have Tracy, who's interested in starting a podcast about building and growing community with information on wellness and event creation and promotion. Let's see, we have Terry, who's a local pastor and chaplain, and he has many years of experience in chaplaincy. I'm interested in doing a weekly news and views kind of podcast. Sabra, sorry if I mispronounced that the first time. Let's see, Kathy is hoping to launch a podcast about bicycling in California, North Bay area. Now that is awesome. Cool. Anyone else want to share their podcast idea? We have Joanna. She's a conscious business consultant, and her podcast will continue to introduce conscious business principles. Awesome.
And I'm Rebecca Lehman, and I am I'm a QuickBooks Pro advisor, but I have many other ideas to do a podcast. Not necessarily that, but not ready to really share yet.
Awesome. Oh, let's see.
Like a URL, California News Stream, and I'm a longtime journalist in Northern California. So I was thinking of embedding some Twitter about California, from California sources, news sources, and having a podcast to go with it.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'm a photographer, and I started documenting the pandemic for my city. So I'm kind of the official municipal photographer, and I've just had a lot of interesting experiences doing that. So I thought that a podcast talking about the community and people who actually are on the front lines would be kind of interesting. So
Yeah, fascinating and very timely. All right, we'll give it maybe one more person. If one more person wants to hop on, and we'll get going.
Sure, my name's Charlie Monahan. I work at Napa Valley College as the Associate Dean of Workforce. And these are great ideas. And I'm a former SBDC advisor too. So I love podcasts, and I want to know how they work.
Awesome. Well, welcome. All right, well, we are going to go ahead and dive in. Now, I realized as you guys were talking that the very first thing to address is not just why to start a podcast, but what is a podcast? So what a lot of people, I think, typically associate with podcasts are the ones that are on your phone. You get with Apple Podcasts. Oh, there's someone unmuted. But they're actually much more than that. Podcasts can actually be on video. It can be on your blog. It can be a variety of mediums. So most people understand them to be in the video or audio format. And so for tonight, we're actually going to be focusing primarily on those audio formats, the kind that are going to show up on Apple Podcasts. So that will be what we're really tuning in on. And we'll talk a little bit about video along the way, because it's very common and very easy to just set up your video recording at the same time as you're recording your podcast. So let's dig into why would we want to start a podcast in the first place? Well, first off, podcasts, if you're in business, podcasts can be a really low cost way to position yourself, or not even in business. In business, or if you have a personal brand, like one of you that's the career expert, podcasts can be a really great way to position yourself as the expert in your field, and be able to put yourself in front of your target audience and really attract high quality leads. You know, from a marketing standpoint, that's what I've seen people do a really successful job of utilizing podcasts to bring in those leads within their existing audience. Another thing that podcasts can do is expand your reach outside of your localized influence. So, you know, it's not just your friends or your in-person network people that you can talk with and share your ideas and share your platform with. You're really expanded to an unlimited audience. That's really anyone who speaks whatever language your podcast is in. It can be a great stepping stone, especially if you want to become a public speaker. So many people who want to go the public speaker route, if you're familiar with that at all, a lot of people want to see examples of you speaking. And so a podcast is a great place to point people to say, hey, here's some of the speaking I've done or have written. And so it can be a great way, and especially if you have a listenership that you can point to, that can be a really great way to get your foot in the door. A lot of those speaking events are looking at what kind of audience you already have that they can leverage to get their event out. And so if you build up your podcast listenership, then it's a really easy step into that public arena. Podcasts also are a potential revenue source, and this will be one of the very last things we talk about. But you can make money through podcasting in a variety of ways. In fact, some of the top podcasts make millions of dollars, like millions. They're making bank. I think New York Times makes 13 million a year, if I remember that correctly. Don't quote me on that. I don't have the statistic in front of me, but that's just from their podcasts alone. Of course, those are the top earners, but we'll go into what kind of money you can realistically make based on what your listenership is. The other thing is that the podcasts have a very active listenership. So there are over 850,000 people in the US alone that are actively listening to podcasts. So talking about our why, I would love to hear maybe from one or two of you, what are your goals in starting your podcast? And let me preface that a little bit. And is the goal to attract leads for your business? Is it maybe you just want a hobby? Are you trying to expand your platform into public speaking? So I'd love to hear from one or two of you guys, just why do you want to start a podcast in the first place? Don't all hop in here at once. Feel free to unmute yourself.
For me, it'd be to become a better public speaker and camera personality.
Awesome. Oh. Let's hear for one other person. Brave person.
For me, it would be, as I said, going into the elementary school classrooms, but and to reach more students with a podcast. But to be, since I don't just tell stories, I actually show the kids how I create a book. So therefore, the interaction, it's the ability to do a little interaction with them. And although I do like going into the classroom, the one-on-one. So I don't know. I'm really just searching to see if this is the way to go, because like I said, the face of education, because of all of this shelter in place, is changing. And my friend, who is a second grade teacher, said that the teachers are having to make their own videos. Mm-hmm. And it's very time consuming, plus try to teach. So therefore, that would be maybe a foot in the door.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah. So there are tons of different reasons you might want to start a podcast. Some of the people in the chat said to make money, to create something that isn't already existing. Lorraine said there is no existing California news stream. You know, someone mentioned wanting to work on their speaking, and Tracy mentioned wanting to get their story and message out. So there's, I mean, like I said, I podcasted just for myself. You know, it's really a hobby for me. It was something that I really enjoyed. And so from everything from for myself, now I'm starting, I'll be starting a new podcast in the coming year that's actually going to be for my business. And the whole point is to drive people to my business, right? So there's a slew of different reasons we might want to start a podcast, and all are very valid, very, very valid. But no matter what our reason is, the very first thing we have to do in order to be successful with this is actually to begin planning our podcast. I cannot stress enough the importance of planning. And I will start you guys out with a personal anecdote. So when I first started podcasting, and this was, my gosh, it's been years now, which seems crazy. But when I first got into podcasting, I thought I would just do everything as I went on. I thought I'll set aside, you know, a certain amount of time a week, and I'll just put out podcasts as I go. And as you can maybe imagine, that didn't work. I ended up skipping weeks on end. I was very sporadic. People were constantly. I had listeners always asking me, you know, when would the next podcast be coming out? And I would have guests on and would not have time to edit them. It was just chaos, that first podcast that I went out. And sorry guys, I am actually gonna close the chat because it's distracting me. Estelle said podcasts are usually audio only. Podcasts actually are both. It's just that that's what people associate with podcasts is audio. It can actually be any kind of virtual casting. So video, audio, all of that. So, but yes, most people understand when they think of podcasts, they're thinking of those audio version podcasts.
I think.
Mm-hmm.
So not video.
So, let's see. Linda, I'll have you watch the chat for me because I've actually closed that out now because it was.
Sure. What instead, Megan, what we'll do is people are welcome to put their questions in the chat, and then when you get to a point for questions, we'll address them.
All right, great. Thank you. Sorry. Let's see. Okay, so when you're planning your podcast, like I was saying, it's important to plan ahead so that you have a game plan and that you aren't, you know, kind of haphazardly going through this. I think while podcasting can be, we're going to go through how you can save a lot of time and shave off a lot of time in producing your podcast. It is so much less stressful to have a full season planned, prepared, and mostly produced so that you have some leeway for yourself. So as we're planning, we're going to want to ask ourselves a few questions. First off, what is our goal with starting a podcast? Now, we've kind of already gone into this, but it's really important because whatever our goal is going to really inform what our podcast is going to be about. If I have a goal to, say, bring in more leads for my marketing firm, then I'm not going to make a podcast about birds, right? I'm going to want to make a podcast that's heavy hitting marketing tips, right? So we want to figure out what is it? And even within that, if it's for your business, you know, thinking about, okay, is my goal to monetize this podcast, or is my goal to serve my current customers, or is my goal to bring in new customers, and trying to figure out, you know, really what do we want out of this podcast? Because it really will inform the decisions we make in the content that we're producing and how we're marketing it and all kinds of different things. Which of course brings us to our next thing we need to plan, and that is, what will our podcast be about? So some of the top podcast topics are society and culture, business, comedy and news, comedy, news and politics, and health. Not comedy and news, though sometimes the news can be comedic. So those are the top 5, and those are the things that people are listening to the most, that people are engaging with that kind of content. And when we're going in and we're looking at what our podcast will be about, that also, the other thing we need to look at is what is our podcast format going to be? So I'm sure you guys have listened to podcasts that are just solo episodes, so it's just one person talking into the microphone, there's not much else. They're talking about one topic, it's pretty straightforward. Then you have the storytelling one that's maybe generally one person. A good example of this is the startup podcast, or like Gimlet Media puts out a lot of kind of storytelling ones where they have the extra audio frills and the different sound effects that are making you feel like you're in the space. Now, of course, those are a higher production level and usually take a lot more editing time than your solo podcasts. But that's another one. You know, does your topic make it more sense to be told in a storytelling format? Then there's, of course, guest interviews, right? So those are really popular and engaging podcasts, having people on. And then people will do a mix. So they might have solo episodes and guest interviews. Some of the storytelling ones might have interviews in the middle of it. Again, I think Startup Podcast is a really great example of that, because he'll be in the middle of telling a story and then he'll sit down and talk to someone and ask them questions. But for now, we're going to focus on those solo episodes and those guest interviews. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. Now, one of the things that I think is the best thing as a podcaster for you to figure out before you start podcasting, before you record your first episode, or I guess while you're kind of recording your first episode, is to give yourself some space to determine if you're better on script or off the script. And what I mean by that is take some time, write out a full script for your full first episode, and just see, do you work better memorizing a script, or do you work better, you know, having bullet points? Does your podcast come out better when you just have those bullet points to follow and you can kind of free flow? Or do you do better just, you know, kind of going off the top of your head, knowing what topic you want to talk about, knowing what key points you want to hit, and speaking from your heart? I think podcasters are very different, and it really depends a lot on personality and just your communication style is what hits the best. But what I do want to emphasize too is that you still listen to your audience, and you still make sure that what you're putting out is easily understood. So we don't want to go totally off script and put podcasts out that make no sense and are just us rambling. You know, we want to make sure that they're still engaging to the audience, that our audience is still being able to grab something valuable for it. And so kind of writing that line of, okay, am I communicating well to my audience, and what am I most comfortable with, and finding that sweet spot, because this is really gonna take a lot of the frustration out of podcasting. I know for me, when I first started, I was writing out full scripts, and it was really frustrating for me. I felt like I didn't come off authentic. I sounded like a robot. I sounded like I was acting. And I ended up finding that what was best for me was to kind of go bullet by bullet and really know my key topics, have some idea of what I wanted to say, and allow myself that freedom. But it's really a person by person thing. And so take the time to figure out what is best for you. Now, going back to making sure that we're planning in advance so that we're consistently putting stuff out for our listeners to engage with, is going to be how often do you want to release episodes, right? So some people, believe it or not, release podcast episodes every single day. And some of them release them once a week. That's probably the most common, is you'll see podcasts released once a week. Some release every other week, and some even only release a month. And so figuring out, okay, for your life, for your schedule, what makes the most sense, what are your listeners going to expect? How often, you know, engaging once you have your podcast up and running, engaging, how often are they asking for new episode releases, also your length of your podcast. If you have an hour-long podcast, I certainly wouldn't say put an hour-long podcast out every day, because nobody's going to have the time to listen to all of your podcasts. But you know, an hour-long once a week is really common. And then if you are looking into doing interviews, this is what is really, really exciting, at least I think, about podcasting, is that you would be surprised who will say yes to your interviews. So think about your audience, think about who is going to be really amazing for them to hear from. And even if you think they're out of reach, go for it. Send them an invite, ask them if they'll be willing to come on, because first off, nobody is offended to be asked to come on a podcast. Like, just nobody. They are normally generally very honored, and even if it's a no, it's, you know, they aren't annoyed. And so I just encourage you, if you want to do an interview style podcast, that you shoot high, and you'll really be surprised who comes back and says yes. So now that we've talked kind of on a high level of like what we're planning and the podcast in general, let's talk a little bit about planning our independent episodes. So when we're planning one episode, first off, we kind of want to take a high level view of the entire season, right? So we've determined at this point how many podcasts we want to release, how often we're going to release them. We should have also figured out how long we want our season to be. Do we want it to be continuous all year? Is it just in the fall? You know, kind of making those decisions. And then we're looking at our full season and we're looking at, okay, what makes sense from a topic by topic standpoint? So that on an individual episode level, we're looking at, okay, what do we want the topic to be for this particular episode? For your general topic, does it need to build on itself? Do they need to like kind of understand simple things before understand greater things, like thinking about the career minded person or the career coach? Do they need to understand something? Is there work they need to do first before they get over here? And kind of thinking about, okay, maybe that's the path my season should follow. So thinking about too, from an episode standpoint, is what do you want the audience's reaction to be for this episode? Because this is going to really inform really how you communicate in this episode. Because if you want there to be a call to action, if you want them to sign up for a phone call with you or something like that, then you're going to talk very differently from if you are just trying to educate them and you just want them to come away with some education. So we've talked about this some, but making sure that we know what key points that we want to make in our episode is vitally important, so that we can stay on task and we're making sure we're getting the most important information into our audience's hands. And then we've already talked about interviews. So who are you going to interview from episode to episode? All right, so we're going to take a brief break for questions.
And we did have a couple more come in the chat. Charlie asked, what is your podcast, Megan?
Yeah, it was Vision Chasers. It's no longer active.
Oh, Kathy is the next post on that. Thanks, Kathy.
Yeah.
And if you have a question right now, you're welcome to write in the chat, but we actually prefer when you just turn your mic on and ask directly, because that way you can interact with Megan.
Yes, you will.
I have a question.
Oh, yes.
Is there a certain a best time of the week to post a blog?
A blog or a podcast?
Or a podcast, I'm sorry.
Nope, you're fine. I would say I am actually not sure about the blog. It really depends on your audience. So what's great about podcasting is you have a ton of analytics that you're going to get from your podcast hosts. And so I really watched on my analytics. I played around at the beginning to figure out when are people actually engaging. Generally you see podcasts launching on or releasing on Mondays, Tuesdays, or Thursdays. Sometimes Fridays, not a ton Wednesdays. Those are three kind of the main days. It really kind of depends too. A lot of people will release later in the week, like on a Thursday or even Friday, because so many release on Monday and Tuesday, wanting you to like get their content very first of the week. So it depends on your goals. It depends on when you want people hearing from you. And then you can also look into your analytics and play around with different release dates to see how many downloads you're getting on whatever day that you are posting.
I have another question.
Yes.
Is there any special trick to getting a following?
Yep. So we'll be going into marketing and different ways to get people listening and all of that stuff. So we'll go into that. That's one of the last things that we'll be talking about.
Thank you.
Megan, there's a couple more questions in the chat. One is, what's the difference between a podcast and a blog? Are they on YouTube?
So the difference between a podcast and a blog is that podcast is generally something that's audio based. Now, a lot of people will put their podcast inside of a blog and serve those to the websites, or serve those onto your websites. I don't suggest only doing that, because like there are so many different platforms like Apple and Stitcher and Google Play and just tons and tons of platforms that will actually do some kind of like search engine stuff for you, so people can actually organically find you. So if you're going to take the time to record either an audio or a video, then you certainly want to, if you put that in your blog, you certainly don't want it to only live in your blog, because different places like Apple Podcasts, people can actually search and potentially organically find you. Are they on YouTube? Depends. Totally on you. So people will put audio only podcasts on YouTube. They will also put, some people will create video podcasts. So if it's a video podcast, you're obviously going to want to let that live on YouTube. That's going to be your best place to put a video based podcast. And I would pull the audio from that and put that on the other audio only platforms. And then you can also put audio only on YouTube and create a nice graphic to go with it for the video.
And another question from Estelle is, why did you decide not to continue podcasting, Megan? I'm trying not to get too personal, but I'm interested from a podcasting point of view.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So it's a really easy answer. I actually won a competition back in November. And when I won that competition, it launched me into a second business. So I now own 2 businesses, and I'm in development on an app. And so between managing, I own a full service marketing firm. I have, my employees, and I'm, managing them pretty much full time. And then also trying to build this app. I just don't have the time anymore. So the app kind of took that place in my heart. And since it was just a hobby, I decided not to continue with it.
And then the last question in the chat is, can you have sponsors?
Yes. Yes, you can have sponsors, and that's also one of the things when we talk about monetizing your podcast, that's going to be one of the things we hit. I also saw from Kathy, are you going to talk about tools and setups? And yes, I believe it's the next thing coming up, but we will be hitting all of that. So you will have everything you need, from tools to monetization to sponsors, all of the information you will need to get started.
And will you be sharing the slides?
Sorry, what was that?
Megan, are you going to share the slides from this presentation?
Yes, they will get those afterwards. Or I guess it normally takes 2 or 3 days, if I remember correctly, to get those emailed out.
In a couple days, you'll receive an email from Emily, and she can include this PowerPoint along with how you can get in touch, how you can locate the recording for this session. And I think we're caught up. I'll review the chat to see if we missed anything, but I'll bring it up. If we do, I'll bring it up during your next Q&A.
Awesome. All right. So as promised, we're talking about equipment. So this is another thing that I feel like when I first started, I got online and I looked at, okay, what do I need to have to start a podcast? And it ended up that I read a bunch of articles that basically told me it's going to cost $1 billion. And it just simply wasn't true. Once you start digging and you get past some of that initial information out there, which there's a lot of information that is like, it feels very scary, or at least it did for me. I was saying, you have to spend a lot of money and you have to spend so much time, and it's just like a total like time suck and money suck and all of this. And I just simply, you know, I dug in, I did my research of how to really launch something effectively. And I found that like most of that simply isn't true. You can really create a really high quality podcast with minimal investment and minimal time. So the basics that you will need is gonna really be determined a lot by your budget. So of course you'll need a microphone. Now, I really suggest that you go out and you get yourself a proper podcasting microphone like a Blue Yeti, Rode Procaster, or a Shure. There's a ton out there with a ton of different reviews. I personally use a Blue Yeti, and all of these options.
I'll hold up my Blue Yeti so people can see what it is. If you're looking at Linda Fitzgerald's camera, that's a Blue Yeti.
Yeah. So these are actually USB microphones, which means they can plug directly into your computer. That was something that when I started looking at podcasting and microphones, I was like, how am I going to connect a microphone to my computer? And so these are really simple. They just, you know, connect right into your USB port, which makes it really easy to record. Now, if you have like absolutely no budget, I want to assure you that you can still start with iPhone and with iPhone earphones. They don't have to be iPhone brand. Mac is just the one that I can personally attest to that the sound quality comes through really great. But make sure they are the kind with the cord. So not the AirPods. Those mics don't have quite as good of quality, I think, because it's so far away from your mouth. But if you're low on budget and you're really just trying to get this out into the world, then you can really, with some iPhone earphones, you know, the kind or something similar, with the mic on the cord, you can get something high quality that you can then clean up a little bit in post. And so I just want to encourage you again. This is really something that you can get going on a minimal budget. The next thing that I'm going to urge you to get is going to be a pop filter. So if you go and you get one of those microphones like the ones mentioned above, you're going to want, and this picture over to the right is what a pop filter is. And so what it is and why it's so important is it actually, it filters the pops, believe it or not. So when you have your hard P's, which show up a lot in recording, especially with higher quality, with actual mics, this keeps your P's from sounding super, super harsh. It also helps with the S's. And so it just improves your audio quality all over. Now, this is not something you'll need if you're just using your earbuds with the mic attached. But if you have an actual microphone, then you're going to want to make sure to invest in it. It is such a small and nominal investment. They cost like $10 and they make the world of difference in your sound quality. The next thing that you can look into is acoustic treatment. Now, I don't want to scare you because this can sound really scary. Like, what do I have to do? Do I have to soundproof my house? And the answer is no, unless you want to. If you're going like hard into podcasting and this is your life dream and you're going to throw a bunch of money at it, then go for it. Go get all of your soundproof wall mounts and all of that. But if you're really just looking to get your toes wet, then a closet works perfectly fine. Or even sometimes I would like build mountains of blankets and just build like a whole little cave on my desk of blankets all around my microphone. So what this does is it really absorbs a lot of that echo. As we'll talk about later, echo is one of the things that you just cannot get out of your audio, no matter how good you are at editing. And so having a bunch of, you know, that's why a walk-in closet that's carpeted works really, really well because you have so many clothes around you. But if you don't have a walk-in closet, then just get all the blankets you have and just build yourself a little nest. And that's going to do a great job, again, at improving your audio quality, making sure there's no echo that you're not going to be able to get out in post. All right, the next thing that you will need is headphones. Now, of course, you can use your in-ear headphones. But if you're able to invest, I really suggest getting your actual canned headphones that are going to be noise canceling. These can really help you, they plug straight into your microphone, and they can really help you be able to hear yourself as you're recording and make sure everything sounds good and kind of test as you're going. With sound, make sure everything's recording properly as well, because there will be times where it's not recording quite right, and with the cheaper headphones, it's hard to tell the sound quality. So, for example, this has happened to me. I've recorded a whole entire podcast on my computer mic on accident instead of my podcasting microphone, and my computer mic doesn't have nearly the high quality as my podcasting microphone, and that's something with headphones that you can actually make sure doesn't happen. So now the other thing that you'll need if you're planning on editing yourself, now you can, I will preface this, you can pay people to edit these podcasts for you. There's tons of professionals out there who will actually take your audio and just edit it for you. There's a lot of people on Fiverr, for example, or Upwork is another one where you can find a lot of podcast editors. And then there's a lot of just really freelance people that's all they do is edit podcasts. But if you're planning on editing your podcast yourself, then you're going to need an editing software. Now, there's a couple free ones. If you're a Mac computer user, then you have GarageBand that comes with your computer. Audacity is one that's available for download if you're not a Mac user. Mac users can use this as well. You can just go Google Audacity. It's a completely free download. And then there's Logic Pro, which is also only for Mac users. It's a paid program. And then if you happen to be someone who has a Adobe Creative Cloud subscription, like I do, then Adobe Audition is a really great option because it's already included in your subscription. That's something you have. This is what I personally use because I already have that subscription, and it is really versatile in what it will allow you to do. And it has so many, I mean, Audacity does as well. I would say those two are probably the top two. Audacity is extremely popular, especially in the podcasting world. And they just have a lot of tools to make it really, really easy on you. Oops. All right, so that's really it. So as you can see, like you can spend, let's see. Oh, it's not letting me go back. But as you can see, you know, you can really, if you're really just trying to get your feet wet and even see if you like it, then you really don't have to invest anything. You can hook up your earphones that you already have with your mic on your wire and go get yourself in a closet and record there. Download one of the free editing softwares. You know, you can invest $0 if you want to. You can invest a couple $100. You can invest thousands of dollars. But it's really something that, you know, whatever you have to invest in, whatever you, however professional you want this to be, what dependent on your goals, is really going to inform that. So are there any questions for now?
Yes, there was one that was earlier that I missed that's similar to an earlier question, but a little different. Is there a difference between a podcast and a video blog, or are they the same thing?
So, I mean, that they are different in that the format is different, right? So, but technically a video blog is also a podcast. It's a little bit semantics, and I'm probably getting a little too in the weeds with that. But yes, I mean, it's video blog, technically a podcast. But if you're talking audio only podcast, then the difference is just really the format. And then also where it can be hosted. So an audio, you know, you can't host or you can't stream a video to Apple Podcasts, right? They only accept audio. And you know, well, most video platforms will allow you to do audio with a graphic, but there is some some differences in that, of course, the major one being where you can actually put it.
Yeah, one thing I noticed with the YouTube, I can't just have the phone in my pocket and like walk around. Like it'll just turn like this, it'll stop if I turn off the phone. Whereas with a podcast, obviously I can just walk around or like drive or do whatever, and it's really low drain on the battery. I can just be doing whatever, making my coffee or something. But with YouTube, it's sort of like a bigger deal to have to experience.
Yeah, from a user standpoint, they're totally different. And there's people who prefer to consume things by video, and there's people who prefer to consume things by audio. I think you'll find that most of the time, the people listening to audio-based podcasts aren't the same people who are sitting and watching YouTube video podcasts.
Sabra's question is, how does the editing software work? Do you start and stop and erase? How does that work?
So we'll get in a little bit into that when we go into editing. I actually have a sample to show you, and we'll talk about some different editing practices. And going off of that, into Rebecca's question, I would absolutely consider teaching an Adobe editing class, and I would love to dig into really the specifics of that. We'll get into some of it. There's not a ton to it, surprisingly. Especially if you're just doing voices, it's not storytelling. You know, the crazy editing comes when you're having sound effects and all of that stuff. But I'd be happy to set up a time to teach an actual editing class and go more in depth. We'll touch on kind of a high level in the webinar today.
And Lorraine says, I publish a podcast for free if I can record and edit the format files, or do I need a paid service to be in the middle?
So we'll go into the different options. There are free and paid options for just about anything with podcasting. So when you say publish with podcasting, you're actually hosting. And so you put a podcast on a host, which will then disperse it out to the various podcast platforms. And some of those hosts are free and some of those hosts are paid. It depends on what you're looking for in a host.
And then the last question is, can Audacity be used for video or only for audio? For instance, can it be used for the audio portion of the video?
So you can use it for the audio portion of the video, but it will not edit the actual video. So, you know, as long as you know how to put that audio back into the video, then you can absolutely use it for both. Now, I am not a video expert by any means. I know enough to get me in trouble. So I'll try to answer any video questions that come up in this webinar, but I know the most about audio-only podcasts.
And that wraps up the chat comments, questions.
All right, let's keep going then. Okay, so what I'm about to share with you and what my focus in is going into these tips for recording is really how can I save you the most time and heartache? Because the biggest reason I feel like people quit podcasting is they try the first few times and they just go, oh my gosh, this takes way too much time. And it absolutely will if you don't know these tricks. So these are things that I actually developed over my podcasting time. That I really got down my podcasting to like, I was maybe spending, oh gosh, like for a 30-minute episode, I would maybe spend about an hour between recording the actual episode, and actually I got my editing down to 10 minutes. And a lot of that was how I recorded, a lot of how quick I got my editing down to. And editing is something that I could spend 10 minutes on it, even if it was an hour-long episode. So that's how geared in I got. But so this is my goal, is giving you the tips and tricks that I learned kind of along the way haphazardly. So first off, it's probably the most obvious one, is to get somewhere quiet. This is, you know, the thing with audio recording. You see maybe as a graphic designer, I see sometimes people will post a funny picture of like those funny client asks, and there'll be like an elephant in the picture. And they'll say, can you make the elephant turn around? And it's like, no, I can remove the elephant, but I can't make him face the other way because the picture's from the behind side. But the same goes with audio. It's like, can I remove a bunch of sounds? And the answer is kind of maybe sometimes. So there are certain sounds that we are able to pull out of the podcast or out of the audio. And we'll go into that in a little bit. But you really want to try to make sure that your recording is as quiet as possible. It's going to save you a ton of editing time, and it's just going to up the quality, because the more noises you're pulling out of your audio, the lower your audio quality of your voice is getting. The next thing that I want to stress to you is that it doesn't have to be perfect, and that is what editing is for. The first time I sat down to record a podcast, I think I recorded it like 9 times, and I was just convinced that the whole thing had to be perfect. And I sat there forever. And I think it's Kathy Heller has one of the biggest podcasts ever. I actually heard her. She had a podcast about podcasting, and she was telling the story of how she did the same thing. She sat down and recorded it like 900 times. And she was like, oh my gosh, like I want to go be spending time with my kids. And so she took the approach, which I actually adopted from her advice, that you record it once. And if you mess up, you stop and you start that sentence over and you keep going. But we record it once so that we are spending the minimal amount of time recording, and that we aren't re-recording so many times and taking up hours and hours and hours just to get one podcast out. The other thing that is so important, and it goes in with being somewhere quiet, and that is that echoes are the one thing that are nearly impossible to remove from audio. So do not record in a space that's very echoey. They are just a pain. Like, they will completely destroy your audio quality. It doesn't sound good. It's the fastest way for your audio to sound really low quality. And it's one of the things that like listeners are gonna stop listening if it's too echoey. Audio quality is really a trust factor when people are listening to podcasts. So you want to make sure it's high. So go somewhere, go to a closet. I promise you, a carpeted walk-in closet is not going to have echoes. Put those blankets around you. Just get your echoes down as much as you can. Because like I said, there's certain noises we can pull out. Echoes are not one of those noises that we're able to pull out. Now, I'm going to share with you the thing that has saved me the most amount of time when I figured this out, because I didn't know it starting. It's just like one of those things you don't know until you know. And that's the 3-second rule. So like I said, we're not worried about getting it perfect. We're doing one run through. This is really the fastest way to get your podcast recorded. And what you do is when you mess up, you stop for 3 seconds. And then you pick back up, hopefully at the beginning of your last sentence or your last thought, wherever you're comfortable. And the reason that we do this is because you can see right here, we have this audio wave. This is much what you'll see in an audio editing software, where you can see clearly where these 3-second marks are. What that does for you is when you go back and you have an hour worth of audio, you can just go, okay, here's a mistake right here. You can go back and just listen to this a little bit, cut what needs to be cut, you can cut and remove this whole audio section, back this all the way up, and it saves you a ton of time because you can immediately, within seconds, identify exactly where those mistakes are, and you know everything in between these things that there's no mistakes in them, right? Because you stopped. Every time you made a mistake, you stopped, you waited 3 seconds. And I can't even tell you, this is what really cut my editing time from like an hour per episode all the way down to 10 minutes. Now, if you are doing an interview, this is not as easy because you have someone else who's talking who isn't used to podcasting and doesn't even when they stop, even if you explain the 3-second rule, they'll often talk through it. And so what I found can be easier with the interviews is to actually clap. And so what you get with a clap is you'll get a big wave that you can actually see in your audio wave. And this is much more, it's a little bit harder to see than the pauses. That's why when it's just you, I suggest you just pause. It's super easy to see. But if you're in an interview, just say, hey, I'm going to clap real quick so I can see where this mistake is, clap, and then carry on. All right. So
So,
more,
question on that.
yep.
Sorry. So you would interrupt the speaker, the interviewee, if they say something like, I mean, if they just kind of make a mistake and they just say, "Oh, wait, stop, can we?" And then at that point, you would clap, or
Yeah, so typically this is going to be when they typically what I will do is up front at an interview I'll say, "Hey, if there's any time you mess up, just stop and tell me that you want to re-say something." And so it is more rare, I feel like, in an interview because people are so used to talking and conversating that most of the time you don't have slip-ups like that. Like at least for me personally, I found I was making a lot more mistakes when it was just me um, doing my one-off episodes. Now with an interview, they would stop it and say, hold on 1 second, that's not coming out right. Can I restart that or something like that? And you just go, yep, totally. Let me just clap so I know in the audio where this is so that I can make sure I cut this out. But normally it's them verbalizing their uncomfort with what they said. Because you certainly don't want to make them uncomfortable unless, because you can, yeah. You don't want to come
yeah, I wouldn't
off
want to
that
break
they're
the flow.
uncomfortable. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
typically it's when they're stopping and going, oh, I want to re-say that or whatever. Um,
Are there any other things that you would coach a speaker or an interviewee before you start recording?
so there's a wide variety. When you're looking into having a interviewee on, you want to make sure one that they're using, if they don't have a podcasting Mac, which most of them won't, that they are using headphones with the microphone on the actual um, thing. Now we'll go into some of the different platforms that you can use for interviewing, and actually Zoom is a really great one too. They do a really great job of removing any noise on the interviewee's side of things, which is great for editing because you don't have to worry too much. But you do want to at least make sure that they know not to be somewhere really echoey, all of these basic rules. Don't be someone really echoey. If you can, get in your closet. I know that's a weird thing to ask for an interviewee, but it's totally your comfort, and depending on who you're asking, you're not going to ask Beyonce to go sit in her walk-in closet, right? Um, but if it's a little more laid back of a style and smaller businesses, or because I'm in a lot of freelancer communities, that's a really common ask on freelancer podcasts because a lot of it is moms at home, and so it really depends on the type of different people that you're interviewing and the vibe of your podcast of how strict you're going to be. But yeah, you want to at least let them know about the basic sound stuff and those kind of things, specifically the echo, because that's the one thing you just can't get out. You can get out mowing, you can get out a lot of stuff, but you cannot get out an echo. So yeah. All right. So another thing that we want to do when starting our recording is actually to turn off all of the electronics and air conditioning. This again is a sound quality thing, because even though we can actually remove most of those electronic sound, the more we have to remove, again, just affects the quality of our voice. And so if we're able to shut everything off, now I know in Reading in the summer, shutting your air conditioning off is just a no-go, and that's fine. Like, this is not a hard and fast rule. But if it's possible to shut those things off, it will improve our audio quality. And the one thing that I like to warn people about is airplanes, because airplanes are not your friend. They are like death to podcasts, because for some reason, the frequency at which airplanes and helicopters fly doesn't sound very loud in your ears, but for some reason on microphones, it gets picked up like crazy, and it shows up really, really loud in audio and can really mess you up, and it's also really hard to get out. So that's another sound that's just hard to get out for some reason. And so wait for airplanes to pass, even if you think they're quiet enough to not be heard. just from experience, you're going to go back and that airplane's going to be way louder than you thought it was. It does help those canned earphones. It's harder when you have the earbuds, but if you have the canned noise canceling earphones, then you can really clearly hear those airplanes and you can hear just how loud they are. But yeah, I like to give a warning about airplanes. I don't know what it is about the frequency they run on, but it does really affect audio. We've talked about the closet when we talked about what you need. So use your closet if you don't have acoustic treatment. Go with your own flow and figure out what works best for you. And so everything that I'm saying is totally subjective. And now it's saved me a ton of time. But figure out what you're comfortable with. Figure out what works for you, what you are happy with, and maybe you have 1 minute podcasts. Like if they're really, really short, those often make more sense for you to re-record instead of, stopping and trying to edit it, right? So just make those decisions and really figure out what's best for your flow, so that you can put out like the best and most natural sounding podcast, because ultimately that's what is going to attract listeners and keep people want to listening, is something that sounds natural and is interesting to listen to. I'm sorry, this is a duplicate because we've definitely talked about re-recording your podcast. You don't have to. Of course, this is really up to you, but this is what editing is for. Now, the one thing that this is super important, and that's when you're recording interviews, is to make sure that you're recording them on separate tracks. Now, anything that you record interviews on, such as Zoom, does have an option to record things on 2 tracks or on 1. And so you want to make sure that they're on 2, which means you're getting 2 audio files, 1 for your voice, 1 for whoever you're interviewing. If you have multiple people interviewing, say on Zoom, you want to make sure you're getting audio files for each person. And we'll go into that a little bit more in editing, but the main reason is from an editing standpoint and making sure that we're able to cut noises from other tracks. Because if they're all on 1 track and someone sneezes in the middle of someone else talking, then of course we're not going to be able to remove that sneeze. Whereas if they're on separate tracks, we can keep going, and it's no problem. Which brings us to editing. Now, I am actually missing a slide. So I meant to have a question slide in there. So let's take a quick break and just go over any questions that have come up so far.
We have one question. Let me go in there. It's one just directly to me. So yeah, not one for general, but we will, there will be the replay of this along with the slides available. And you have a comment from Tracy of great tips.
Awesome, thank you. All right, oops, and we'll keep going into editing. So if you have played by the 3-second rule, this should be a brief. The next steps we're going to be doing is really, really simple. Like, I can't stress to you, if you want to take on editing yourself, this is something that it's something that can be really, really quick, really, really streamlined. You figure out what you like as far as, sound goes. There are, if you Google search, there are tons and tons and tons of different, styles and what people like. Some people will like more compression, and some people don't. But the one thing that you're always going to want to do is remove your noise. The second thing, which I'm actually going to walk through with you, is this sweep for harsh frequencies. So let me actually pull over an example of an audio file just to show you how simple editing something is. This is actually in Adobe Audition, and like I said, I'm happy to set up another webinar to go really in depth in this. But just for an example, removing your noise, you actually just pull a blank section of audio, which is going to bring all the room noise. So any kind of hisses and that show up in the audio, that's just simply the room noise is going to show up in this. And all you do, capture noise print. So this is going to, this program says, hey, I have all of this noise information, And sorry, I'm used to using the shortcuts. We're going to do a noise reduction, click apply, it's gonna process, and there you go. We have all of the room noise removed from our audio, so you can actually hear.
Everyone. Welcome to.
So there's no real room noise. Now, this is as simple as just removing these. You can see right here, this would be the 3-second rule. I can just remove these blanks. This is obviously an example. So I know there's nothing before that, but you can see how easy it is to see exactly where the mess ups are.
Hey everyone, welcome to How to Start a Podcast.
Right, I cut that one a little bit too short. We won't go too deep into it. But what I say when I say sweeping through frequencies is you actually use parametric equalizer. And this is a little bit in the weeds, but I just want to show you like how easy this can be. What you do is you pull, what this allows you to do is actually pull on certain frequencies and let me set this to where I can grab it. You can actually pull, listen.
Hey everyone, welcome to
and
How to Start a Podcast.
You can set, it's too short of an audio clip. I will need to put a longer audio clip next time, but you can actually listen for, it will sound like a when you get an annoying frequency. So you can like basically choose one frequency, put the loudness or the audio, turn the volume up on that one frequency, sweep through your audio back and forth across all of the frequencies, and pull out harsh frequencies so that there's nothing that's like in your audio that is kind of creating like a jarring sound. So it's a little in depth and probably a little too in the weeds. It's way easier to see when I have a longer audio file, so I'll make sure next time to include that. And of course, if we go and do an editing in-depth deep dive, then we'll make sure we have a long enough audio file to do that. But if you just go and Google sweeping for frequencies on a podcast, you'll see exactly what I mean. It's just crazy how easy you can remove these noises and how much it improves your quality of audio. It sounds great when you just remove the noise, but when you sweep for those harsh frequencies, it just ups the level even more. Then for the experts who you're really, really comfortable with that, then that's when you can go and you can deep dive and you can play around with all of the different options, playing around with reverb and compression, and there's just unlimited different things that you can do to audio to get the perfect sound. But for beginners, it's just those 2 steps and that's it. Like that's how fast it can be. You just remove all the mistakes, remove the noise, which takes all of 2 seconds, sweep for frequency, which takes another 5, and you're good to go. Now, we talked about this and why we need multiple audio files when doing interviews is for removing the sound from the other track when a person's talking. So specifically, what comes up a lot that is really important is not even necessarily the sneezes, but it's often the uh-huhs and yeahs and totallys, right? When someone's responding like normal conversation. And for the most part, we want to leave those in. But a lot of the time, those are actually not loud enough in the mix to be able to be heard at all. And so if they're all on one track, but they kind of come out as like, and you can't really understand it or hear, and it just sounds like a weird noise in the background. And so making sure that when we're recording an interview that we're going through and we're removing anything, leaving the ones that feel natural and are loud enough that you can clearly hear them say, yeah, or uh-huh, because so it feels natural and like a conversation, but making sure we're removing the ones that are mumbled out. And that is really the key as to why we want those on separate tracks, because it can really ruin an interview if it's all in one track and someone is saying, uh-huh, yeah, every other word you say, because that's really common, especially when people are nervous and not used to podcasting. They will say, uh-huh, yeah, like every other word. And so you want to have some freedom to remove some of their responses and create a more natural conversation, so they don't sound so nervous. All right, so any questions so far?
Yes, there is one. It's, will this work for video as well as audio?
Will this work? What in particular? Well, so with the audio, with everything that we just went over, again, I'm not familiar as much with video, but you can pull your audio from your video, pass it through this program, and put it right back onto your video.
And if I can add a little bit more, Megan, because I do edit videos.
Yep.
For me personally, I have a PC and I use Camtasia for editing, and it's very similar. I noticed with the software that Megan's using, it's very high functioning for audio editing, far beyond what I do at the video level. But yes, video is very similar. And then there's another question. What are your thoughts about providing transcripts for clarity and those who may have a hearing impairment?
So I think that transcripts can be great. I often say, send the podcast out in as many ways as you can to reach, because different people like, not, you know, of course, hearing impaired, but also different people just like consuming content different ways. And there's people who are just going to prefer to read a transcript. Now, I typically suggest, rather than, you can have a transcript in your show notes, and I would throw it there. But often what people do is they actually make it a blog post, and you might not even know there's an audio version. They just have a big blog post with the script, and they might clean it up so that it's more geared towards a blog. Of course, when you're like listening direct from Apple Podcasts or anything like that, then there's not really, you know, it's, yeah. Sorry, there isn't as much of a ability to like link a ton of stuff. Like show notes, for example, are typically on your actual website. There's like only a minimal amount that you can kind of do on the actual platforms. Yeah, I think most people will put it into a blog format, not only for hearing impaired. And then if you have anywhere that you have your audio, you can link as well to that information. But yes, for hearing impaired and just for people who prefer content in written format, then it is a great place. You know, as a marketer, that's like 1000% what I suggest people do. It's also, you know, a big problem I feel like with people as a marketer and with a lot of my clients is having enough content to put all over the internet. It's like, it feels like you have to have all the content in the world. And so getting transcripts of it can also create more content for you to use across different platforms.
That wraps up our chat questions.
Yep, Rep.com is a service. There's a lot of services out there. Yeah, and sometimes a lot of people too will if you wrote a script, then they will post the script because that's often easier to read than the actual transcript. So if you have a full-flown script, then you can put that in as well. Yep, YouTube has transcripts abilities as well as Facebook. All right, so let's talk about marketing your podcast. So actually getting listeners onto your podcast. Okay, so first off, if you are doing interviews, this is by and far the fastest, easiest way to get people on your listening to your podcast, because whoever's a guest, if you most guests are going to be more than willing to share your podcast with their followers, because it gives them influence. It gives them, every time they're on a podcast, it gives them credibility, because nobody other than you really knows what your listenership is, right? So for all they know, you could be a big old thing. This guest could be on and talking to 10 people, and they're still going to be willing to share it on their platforms, because it legitimizes them. It's a credibility marker for them. And so leverage your guest audience. And, you know, think about that. If you really want to grow your platform, think about who you're having on as guests, you know, because you can get people with very large audiences, you know, especially like what I found is with people on Instagram in particular, because that's normally where my target market kind of sits. If you find people with 3,000 to 5,000 followers, even though it doesn't seem like a lot, those people's audiences are normally extremely engaged. And that's just with Instagram. Of course, you can look at, you know, look at people's LinkedIn's and just look at their engagement and how engaged their audiences are. Because people with huge audiences might not have as engaged audiences. And so what you want to look at is how much does these people audience trust them, and are they going to go listen to this podcast because they love them so much, right? So we've actually had a company back in the day that was a product-based company, and we did a lot of influencer marketing. And one of the things we found was that a lot of people that we would go and give product to or pay to post that had like 100,000 followers, we thought that would be amazing. And it just turned out that we got way better results on the lower end, because on the lower end, people were way more engaged with their accounts than on the higher end. So the other thing is, of course, social media, right? I say this like all the time: if you build it, they will not come unless you tell them to come. And so social media is a great place to do that. Also, I mean, just good old fashioned text, like text everyone you know and ask them to go listen to your podcast. But be active on your socials, on your personal socials, especially if you're just starting out, because when you're just starting out, you don't need to be taking all the time to be putting up an Instagram for your podcast. And in fact, most podcasters, even huge podcasters, don't have a social media account just for their podcast. Most of them use their personal social media accounts, and they might transfer them over to a business account. But really, everything's really associated around the podcast host. And so you can use your personal accounts and use it to push, and use the people who are already there, who already care about you, and let them know that you have this and that you would love for them to check it out. Another option is using paid social media. So this can actually be really effective. You can actually put, if you have money that you want to spend towards advertising, then you can put money through Facebook, Instagram, advertising. I've seen those be really successful. If it's a video, then certainly putting money into YouTube advertising can be really successful, but you can get really cheap listens from those ads. You can see exactly who's actually going and downloading your podcast, clicking through and listening. And you know, if you have the money, then that is a way that you can, you know, very quickly get your podcast in front of more people. The other thing you want to do, we've touched on this some, and that's submitting your podcast across platforms. Now, most hosts are going to do this for you. And I just realized I think we've missed a slide. I skipped over the slide about hosting. So most hosts are going to do this for you. And we'll talk about hosts real quick. It was back in equipment, but I'm realizing I think the slide accidentally got missed. But with hosts, these are places where you're actually storing your audio. So the thing with podcasts, I think that people don't realize is that you have to pay someone to actually keep that audio on the internet for you. And so there's these hosts. A few of them are like Anchor, Blueberry, SoundCloud, and Libsyn. There's tons and tons and tons more, but those are a few, to name a few, that you will actually put your podcast on them, and then they will disperse it to all of the podcast providers. So there are, I think, around, I don't know, 13 to 17 main podcast providers. So these are things like Podbean and Stitcher and Apple Podcasts. And so they're making sure that you're getting on all those platforms. And what that does is it opens you up for more people to organically find you through searching. So if you're a marketing podcast, right, and people are searching marketing podcasts, then yours might pop up. And so that brings also into light the question of what you're naming your podcast and how searchable your podcasts are, and making sure that you're using words that your audience is likely potentially searching when looking into these places.
Megan,
All right.
this question kind of fits in at this spot right here. What does it generally cost for hosting?
Okay, yeah. So I'm gonna go back to this slide real quick. I'm sorry, guys. You're gonna have to see the back end real quick because this is actually really important. There we go. All right. So first off, so with podcasting hosts, it has varying degrees of pricing. I think some of them are as much as, I think Libsyn on the like high end as much as $50 a month. But Anchor on the low end is actually a free platform. Now, Anchor in particular has, and it's anchor.fm. They have a different model than some of these others do. Now, SoundCloud, you can host a number for free, and then above that, you'll have to pay for a SoundCloud subscription, which I believe is somewhere between $6 to $10. I think Blueberry starts around, you know, I'm not going to make up prices. I'm sorry, I should have had these. But Anchor FM, why they are actually free is because their model is different. So these all you're paying for actual hosting. Anchor FM actually has advertising within the platform, and you can actually partner with their advertisers and put it on your podcast. Even if you just have 2 listeners, now you're not going to make much money off it, but they're actually taking a cut of the ad spend that you put into your podcast. Now, you don't have to advertise if you're on them, which is really great, which is what makes it a really great option, because it's still free even if you don't advertise. And then also, if you do advertise, you can also advertise other people. You don't only have to use their partners. And 2 other things that we didn't mention that we'll mention real quick since we're here that you will need is 1, a hard drive. Those audio files are going to be huge, and your computer will fill up super, super fast. And so you're going to want to go out and get a hard drive to save all of those audio files on, so that they're not living on your actual computer. And the second is a website. Now, this is not necessarily required. You can have a landing page of sorts. I think Apple Podcasts has required you to have some URL, but it is a really good place to make sure that so that you can include show notes in different ways. And show notes in particular, and a website in particular, is going to be really important when we talk about monetizing your podcast, because there's some ways that will need a website in order to monetize. Cool. All right. Are there any other questions before we keep?
Yes, excuse me. What is Zencaster under interview equipment?
Sorry about that. I guess I should have gone over that too while I was there. Sorry, I missed that slide. Zencastr is it's an online program. It does have some cost to it. That just allows you to record interviews. So you can give a person a link, much like Zoom. They show up. It's audio only. Or I'm pretty sure it's audio only. I've been on a few podcasts where I was the guest, and there was never a video. So, yeah, it's just a platform that allows you to do interviews. Zoom works just the same. You can, of course, click the record feature. So those are just options for the interview.
Megan, another question on this slide is, can I use a thumb drive in place of an external hard drive?
Sure, absolutely. As long as you might end up with a bunch of thumb drives. I don't know how big thumb drives are anymore, but you think it's kind of crazy, but your podcast files can be multiple gigabytes, you know, especially if they're long. And so you can fill up a thumb drive pretty stinking fast, especially if it's only like a 5 gigabyte thumb drive. But I think they can go up to like 100 now. I don't know. Wow, I feel old. I'm not old, but I feel a little old now, not knowing how big thumb drives are. But yeah, you can use any external thing. Just know that audio files are really large, especially if they're high quality. And so that's kind of the trade-off, is just making sure you have enough space somewhere to save those. All right. All right, so another thing you want to do in marketing your podcast is actually ask people for reviews. Ask about it. You'll hear this a lot in a podcast. In the actual podcast, they will ask for you to go and leave a review. A great way to get reviews is to do giveaways as well. For, hey, anybody who will give me a review, I have a giveaway going on for this. And you can have them screenshot their review and prove that they, left it and all of that. But the reason this is so important, and ask your friends, don't be afraid to ask your friends. Your friends are not going to be annoyed that you ask them for a review. And the reason this is so important is because those reviews, along with the number of downloads, those reviews are really what is determines by, the podcasting platforms. What they determine is something people like. And so you're going to get pushed up and up on the numbers list, and you're going to have more and more chances to be found organically if you're getting a lot of reviews. So as much as you can, pedal for reviews, because it's going to get your audience to grow organically on those platforms. The other thing you can do is get on other people's podcasts. So go on as a guest, and it's actually, there are a lot of people with a lot of podcasts. And you can find them. A great place that I've found is actually on Facebook. There are a lot of active Facebook groups in almost every niche. And within those niches, you can find podcasters who have podcasts and just get to know them. And, if you have podcasts, there's a lot of kind of quid pro quo you can do as well. Like, hey, I'd love to have you on. I'd love to be on your podcast. You can just straight up pitch yourself to people. And don't be afraid to pitch yourself to people. Put yourself together, a pitch deck, especially once you have some listeners about you. People will really, people are eager to have people on, even if they're just an industry expert. A lot of people are looking for podcast guests. So get out there and connect with other podcasters. Twitter is also another place where a lot of, has a really rich podcasting community. Now it depends on your niche. Twitter, of course, is like more into the news and some of that stuff. And so kind of news related podcasts, there's a lot of networking that can be done over Twitter. But think about, where can you go find other podcasters? Look for podcasting groups, look for different communities or networking events that you can meet these people, or even conferences. Go to conferences and meet other people who are podcasting, especially if you can find something that's like niche, and within your niche show people who are podcasting who are focused on news. Like I guarantee you there's a group out there that you can connect with and, potentially get on their podcast. So that can be a great way to, just get your voice out there, get your message out there, and get people back and looking at you. The other thing is, oh, go ahead.
Can you explain what a pitch deck is?
Yeah, it is, man, how do I explain what a pitch deck is? Sorry, it's a little bit of a robust thing, but basically what it is it's a pitch. So you're sending them all the information as to why they should have you on. And so typically what a pitch deck will include is like your number of listeners, the number of followers you have on social media. Another word for it in the podcasting world is like a media kit. And so a pitch deck for podcasts is typically a media kit, and they can kind of be used interchangeably, but it's virtually something that's saying, hey, this is what I specialize in. Here's the topics I like to talk about. Here's some links to some different talks I've given so that they can easily click through and see. It doesn't necessarily have to be in like a slide deck form. It can just be an email, but it's virtually just a pitch that gives all the, information that might be important to them. And so, the topics you like to talk about, why you want to be on their podcast is going to be important to them. How many followers and all of that can be important to them, because some podcasts are going to care about that, and they're not going to, so if you have some impressive numbers, that can be something to include. But that's basically what that's a really short version of a pitch deck. I feel like I could probably give a whole entire webinar on pitch decks alone, because they can be really important for so many different things. All right. So the next thing that we'll go into is getting an email list. So this is great in keeping your downloads up. So once people are on your podcast, if you can capture their email somehow, a lot of people will do this like with a freebie, like especially if it's, you know, something that's educational. They'll say, hey, go download this over on my site. They'll capture your email that way, and then you can actually notify people when new podcasts are out. This will just help your downloads get up. I will tell you, when I had an email list, my downloads stayed consistent, and if I forgot to send out an email, my downloads for that particular episode, you could tell the difference. So this is really great in keeping those download numbers up and making sure people know that a new podcast is out, which all of that does is continue to up your game and up your importance on those search results for the podcasting platforms. And lastly is to create a blog on your website with your podcast embedded. So this can be something that has, you know, all your host is going to have a little line of code that you can copy and put into your website. And if you have the time and ability to put this on, this can get people who are organically already on your website, clicking through, learning about your podcast, and then ultimately growing your listenership. All right, so let's stop for questions real quick before we go into this last little bit.
We don't have any in the chat right now, but people might be typing them right now. But if you have one and you're willing to turn your microphone on, now would be a good time to do that. Nope, we don't have any.
Okay. All right, let's dive right into monetizing your podcast. Now, I want to start and say you do not have to monetize your podcast. I chose not to. I did not want to be putting advertising in my podcast just again because it was a hobby, because of the nature of what I was putting out there and who I was serving. I chose not to. I didn't need to. It wasn't a goal of mine to monetize it. But if a goal of yours is to monetize your podcast, and if you want to become a full-time podcaster, which is totally possible, then these are certainly things that you will want to know, and you'll want to actually grow with these things in mind. So the first way you can monetize your podcast is not going to be a solution for everyone. This is going to be a solution particularly for service or product-based businesses that are trying to sell something on the other end. And so, for example, if you're a social media guru and you want to run people's social medias, you might put out a podcast that gives people social media tips, and ultimately end your podcast with, hey, if you want help with your social media, go to this website. We'd love to help you. Fill out this form. We'll talk soon, right? So this is a way to monetize your podcast. If you're a business, this can be a really effective way to monetize your podcast. So you use your podcast not for advertising, but to promote your own services. The next way is you can use referral programs. So some of you might be familiar with affiliate links. One of the most popular ones is going to be Amazon. So if you talk about a product in your podcast, you can actually go get an Amazon affiliate link for that product, put it in your show notes, tell people, hey, go to the show notes and go get this product. And they can click through on your links, especially if your podcast is in those blogs. They can click on your links, go and get the thing, and you can actually get paid for promoting those products. And then last, the most tried and true way to monetize is actually your paid advertising, which you have all heard. They're generally at the beginning, middle, or end of podcasts. You hear those, they stop the roll and the host begins talking about some mattress or some computer software, right? This is the podcast advertising and what we normally think of when we think of monetizing our podcasts. So if this is something that you're interested in, this is something that you can really start pretty soon out the gate. You don't have to have a crazy large listenership. I've heard of podcasts starting off with having advertising before they even exist, even when they're really small. And so you can start out with actually pitching to smaller companies that your audience would be interested in, and that those companies would benefit from getting in front of your target audience, right? You can pitch them on like a nominal fee if you're just starting out, just super cheap, like $5, whatever it is. If you don't have much or any of a listenership, and then grow from there. And you don't need to start out with, you know, I'm trying to think who's always like, I feel like Brookshire and their sheets are always advertising on podcasts. Like you don't have to start out with the big dogs. You don't have to start out with the name brands. You can even start locally, you know, and just small companies that would benefit from getting in front of your audience. Now this is another place where a pitch deck comes in handy, where you actually put together, it's different because you're pitching to someone who would potentially pay to be advertised. But you would put together, okay, why should they advertise with you? Who are your listeners? What are your demographics of your listeners? How many listeners do you have? How many followers do you have? How many downloads can they expect per episode? And so just to give you an idea of what kind of podcasting numbers look like, typically for 15 to 25, or advertisers will spend $15 to $25 for every 1,000 listeners, and that's per podcast. That number largely depends on where they go in the role. So whether they're front, middle, and I think mid-roll has the most expensive marks, but you can see, like, you know, there's podcasts out there with 1 million, I'm just doing some math real quick, with 1 million listeners, say they're making $15 per 1,000, they're making $15,000 per podcast they put out for one advertisement. And normally there's multiple advertisements. So there's podcasts out there that can make, you know, $30,000 a podcast. It's insane. But if you're really wanting to get into those big numbers, what sponsorship agencies look like, and there's plenty out there, there's agencies that will actually go out and get those advertisers for you. Now, again, starting out, you're going to have to pitch yourself. You're going to have to go to small companies. You're going to probably be making next to no money, but it will help legitimize. But sponsorship agencies look for a minimum of 3,000 to 5,000 listeners before they'll actually represent you. And so it's really important that you have a good marketing strategy in place if this is the direction you want to go, so that you can get to those $3,000, $5,000 mark, and start really going after kind of the big dogs and bringing in an agency that can help you just grow that. All right, and that is it. Do you have any final questions?
And this would be a great time for you to turn on your microphone if you have them, because this is where Megan can give you so much more, because she can have the two-way conversation with you.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested in getting a consultation later once I kind of have the concept worked out in my head, and yeah, would love to find out more about that, how to do that.
Yeah, so we'll put a slide up here at the very end, but you can contact, if you're in California or Northern California, or California in general, Linda or David would be the knowledge on that. But I don't know where you're located. We're in Redding.
I'm in the Bay Area.
Okay, so I think that you...
Yeah, I can address that for you, Megan. Every county in the US has an SBDC. Mm-hmm. So in whatever town you're in, go to Google and type in SBDC and the town you're in, and you'll get directed to the one near you. Each SBDC location has a number of advisors, all with different specialties, and they can point you to the right person in your area. And there are a couple more questions. Let me get those to you. Is it tricky to find the right location to edit the podcast?
I'm not sure I understand. Hold on one second. I'm trying to find the chat here. Yeah, can you clarify what that question is referring? Are you referring like in the audio where you, like where I showed you where those 3-second dead zones are, or how do you, if you repeat the sentence? How do you?
Sabra, if you have, sometimes people don't have the ability to turn on their microphone. So if you could type in another question, we'll address a few other questions and then come back if you can give us some more clarity, and I'll get to your question in just a moment. There's a question of, are there nonprofits that buy sponsorship?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, ultimately they're looking at how many people, if it makes sense for them and they want to get in front of people's faces, like nonprofits spend money on advertising every day. They all have an ad budget. Not all, of course, relatively small nonprofits might not. But yeah, nonprofits, if they think that it'll help them get their message out, they will definitely. What are the names of the agencies? I don't know any off the top of my head. There, you know, it's you can Google search ad agencies for podcasting and find some. It's also once you start getting known, agencies will start kind of contacting you as well, because ad sponsors will want to get on your podcast if they start hearing some buzz around your podcast. So that sometimes agencies will find you. Of course, you can do your research, and there's just, you know, there's tons out there.
Do you have any recommendations for how to get original music, like for the intro or the outro?
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. So there are places like MusicBed is probably the best, that has so many options. Now you do have to pay for the license on that. So you want to make sure you're paying and have the proper commercial license in order to include music. Now the thing with MusicBed is that it is more expensive. Now there is one called Premium Beats that is, I think it's $49 for the license to use a music. And then another thing is that if you know
Is that per song?
Yes, that's per song. If you know musicians, if you have any friends or any connections to musicians, or even if it's like third connection, this is another place that musicians love, like it's credibility for them. And so you can often get them to give you license for free to use their song. This is actually, now currently the podcast that I have that's still out, this doesn't have this, but before that podcast, my season 1, which actually isn't out for the public anymore, is I did this. So I had friends that were musicians. I lived in Nashville at the time. And so I had friends that were musicians that actually allowed me to license their music for free because they liked being on a podcast and being able to say that their song was the intro on a podcast.
That's a great idea.
There's a question. If you repeat a sentence because it wasn't correct, how do you locate that place?
Yep. So that's the 3-second rule. So if I can, let me just pull up this audio file. That's when you stop. After you mess up, you stop, and then you can start repeating so you can clearly see, okay, there's no audio here. That's why it's flat. So you can see these little waves. Are you talking? And it being flat is where you're taking that 3-second pause. And so you can go back and listen through this to figure out where you need to, like, you might need to cut some of this out and pull this back. But you just go back, listen through, and you're able to just, you know, highlight it and cut it to remove that. But so that's the importance of that 3-second rule, so you can easily identify where those breaks are.
And Maurice, I don't know if you saw it, but there's a note in the chat to you where Pamela recommended someone in San Francisco that might be a valuable.
Oh yeah, I
coach
did.
for you.
Yeah, I got it. I copied and pasted it. I'm going to check
Oh,
on her
great.
later. Thank you. That's great. Yeah. Thank you, Pamela.
Megan, one thing that I think I can add, if you don't mind, is can I talk a little bit about when people set up interviews?
Yep, totally.
I have been on each side of the interview process. Here, let me turn my camera on. It feels a little more personal. There we go. I've been on each side of the interview process. I've been the interviewer and the interviewee. And what was nice for me is I was an interviewee first. So I got to learn how an established interviewer does it. And what she did is she sent me the questions ahead of time. And she said, I just want you to know the topics. I don't want you to formulate too much of an answer. I just want you to feel comfortable with the questions that you're going to be able to answer in such a way that honors your company and puts your company in a good light. I loved that. So then when it was my turn to interview, I did the same thing for the people that I was interviewing, and they liked it. And I added a couple questions. I added questions for them that I just wanted them to text me the answer. I said, what are 2 or 3 important things that associate with you or your business that you want to make sure come across? Because maybe they're not in my question. Maybe I want to formulate a question to make sure you can get that information out there. And that helped when I was on the interviewee side. It helped me to prepare, because I did an interview just recently with, it was an international interview, and the woman hadn't done interviews before. And I have to really watch my brand, and I didn't know where she was going to take me. So I had her, we did a pre-call. She didn't know what it was going to be. So we did a pre-call, and it was like 10 minutes of, let me know what you want to do. Okay. And then I knew where she was going to take me. And that helped so much, because I don't want to have a lot of awkward space where there's a bunch of editing necessary. So just sharing that communication, if the questionnaire isn't right, having time before the call to talk for 5 or 10 minutes and get comfortable, and then make sure that we're going to highlight the right things for each other. Because that interview, you want to honor the value that each side brings.
Yeah, and that's
really great.
I didn't go too much into interviews, but everything you're saying is exactly what I would do. You want to give them questions up front, and you do want to make sure they don't script those, because it's very obvious when someone shows up to an interview and they think that they are responding to questions and they have a script written, and then because it's a conversation, you want it to feel natural, and then you go, oh, well, what about that? And it throws them off. So you want to make sure you communicate, like you said, like, hey, this is going to be really free form. We might ask this question. This is what questions I think I might ask. We might go somewhere else. And it's okay if we go somewhere else, so that they aren't totally thrown if the interview goes somewhere else. And giving it the freedom to go where it wants to go. And then also with interviews, you want to make sure you get the information you need up front to be able to promote them. And so like their social media handles, their web addresses, and those kind of things. And then, sorry, more. I'm like, I wasn't thinking about interviews. I didn't put too much content. But another thing that I found to be super successful on the marketing standpoint is when I had a guest on, I would actually send them graphics and say, hey, and normally I used a, I used a program called Headliner. That's actually just an online tool. It's not free though. I think there might be a free version. It's inexpensive though. And I would put like, I don't know if you've seen the videos where the audio file goes up and down and up and down. You can kind of see the waves. I would actually make a cool little video graphic like that for them to be able to share on their socials. And I found that when I gave them something to post on their socials, they were far more likely to post. Because they had something to post and they don't have to create a whole new post or a new graphic or whatever. So that was something that I found for getting them to share to their audience. I have a question on my private chat from Joanna. Are there any particular ways to target specific audiences, demo, age, education, interest? Yeah, it depends on, any marketing plan that you put together is going to be looking at specific demos and asking, where are these people living? Of course, if you're targeting for a podcast for Gen Z, you might go to TikTok and be posting, sample interviews or like hype stuff about the podcast on TikTok, right? Whereas if you're targeting millennials, you might be spending a lot more of your time on Instagram. If you are doing paid advertising, then you can certainly niche down as specific as you want within age, education, interest. But outside of, paid advertisement where you can literally, with Facebook ads, you can just say, I want this age, I want this education, I want this interest. Outside of that, you really want to look at like, okay, where are they living? Where do they engage? Like say you're doing a podcast for lawyers, like where do lawyers hang out? Like what conferences are there at? Can you go buy a table at a lawyer conference? Can you put an ad in a lawyer magazine? Can you, so just thinking about who your target audience is and where they're going. And that's something that, here at the SBDC, either us or if you're not in our local area, someone in your local area who specializes in marketing can walk you through how to communicate and get a plan in place to reach those target audiences.
Anything else you want to touch on, Megan?
Yeah, I think that's really it. We just can wrap up real quick. So, you know, just going through what we've covered, we talked about why would you want to start a podcast in the first place, planning your podcast, equipment you'll need, tips for recording, editing your episodes, marketing your podcast, monetizing your podcast. Now, if there are all of these, like this was very high level, there's so much that can go into podcasting. And so I encourage you, if there's something you want more information on, like Rebecca did earlier, tell us, shoot us an email and say, you know what, I really love to go way more in depth on marketing your podcast, or I would love to go way more depth on recording, or like she said, editing, or, you know, just anything that you would like to see a really dialed in specific webinar for, please tell us, because I would be happy to put that together for you and make sure that you have like exactly, I would love to see a pitch deck workshop. See, that's great. That's actually a really good idea. We need a pitch deck workshop, because that is really important for a lot of different things. And so, yeah, please, when you get that email in a few days from Emily, who's going to give you these slides, she's going to give you this recording. When you get that email, you can also respond. I think there's a questionnaire that you can fill out then and give us your notes, and anything you would like to see then, that would be a great place to put it as well. So if anything ever comes up, you can also email us at any time. This is our personal location at the Shasta-Cascade SBDC. You can, like Linda has mentioned, you can also find the SBDC in your area if you are not in the Shasta, Trinity Counties area. But yeah, let us know. Like Linda mentioned, we offer one-on-one advising. And so if you want to go in depth on your particular podcast idea, I would be happy to set up a time to chat with you and see what it's going to take to get you launched.
And one other thing that we want to mention, Megan talked about, you were getting an email from Emily in a couple days. What's really important to us is there's a survey on there. And the survey is how we prove to the companies that fund us that we're having an impact. So please, if you could please fill out that survey, it means a lot to us. It means a lot to us being able to continue doing these webinars. And one of the questions in there is, what other things would you like to learn? Just like Megan talked about, because we want to create for you the trainings that you're wanting. And if we don't know what they are, we can't do it. So we would love your feedback, and we'd love to hear how we're doing. Let us know areas where we can do better. We are all about it. So please do communicate with us. And we still have a couple more minutes. We do not need to wrap up early if you guys want us to keep going. We are here for you. It's 7:25 Pacific time. Are there more questions? I think everyone has gotten it, Megan. And like Megan mentioned, and I did earlier, you can meet with Megan. You can set up sessions with her if you are in Shasta or Trinity County. And if you're located somewhere else and you're still in the US, you're going to be supported by an SBDC in your county, and you can search for it. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We appreciate your participation, and we will see you at another webinar.
Thank you.